doomed to die like her mother, and cursed to love like his father. So goes the tale of Feathertail and Stormfur, siblings, and protagonists of the most recent Weird arc I am discussing, The New Prophecy, although protagonist is a little bit of a stretch. So Feathertail and Stormfur, siblings, the children of Greystripe and Silverstream, and the grandchildren of Crooked Star. These characters are kind of complicated, and not the fun kind. So, let's get into this. Welcome back to the Protagonist Profiles, where I discuss protagonists of Warrior Cats. And yes, that does mean people that don't have a lot of showing as protagonists. Whether it be 2 chapters or 500, I'm going to talk about them. So let's get into this. So first off, who are Silverstream and Stormfur? So let's start with Stormfur. It's kind of boring. He's just really boring as a protagonist. I mean, here's, in concept, he's pretty much Greystripe's son. You know, he's good-hearted, bit of a goofball, sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident. He's very broody at times. You know, he'll often be deep in thought, which I wonder if that's just a character trait of his, or just kind of the curse of being a POV. I don't know. Not much to say about him. He's kind of generic as a point of view character. You know, if you swapped him out for someone like Brambleclaw, who's also kind of generic, virtually nothing would really be different. You know, they have the same kind of moralities, even though he's a RiverClan cat. Which, by the way, this is our first non-ThunderClan POV in the entire Warrior Cats, and it's not that much different. There's no really bit of his personality or worldview that is different enough from being a normal cat that we've seen before. Same can kind of be said for Feathertail. In her first appearance in Moonrise, she's kind of boring. I mean, to be fair, she doesn't have that many chapters to actually be a character, but even then, we don't get nothing. Even less so than Stormfur, who had even more chapters. Of course, in her graphic novel, she's a lot more interesting. You know, she's a lot more contemplative and a lot more cynical, which is very interesting to see. Eventually, she does go through this kind of journey to eventually come to a place where she's a lot more forgiving and does line up to be this more graceful and, you know, nice cat with a little bit of sass, much like her mother. But we'll get to that a bit later. So, speaking of the books that they are protagonists of, let's first start off with Stormfur. Stormfur is the quote-unquote main warrior POV of Moonrise, and he, like I said, is very boring. He does do some interesting stuff. He does acclimate to tribe life very well. You know, he learns to hunt like the tribe. I mean, he does know how to hunt in multiple different ways. Not only is he a RiverClan cat, he was briefly trained as a ThunderClan apprentice. So he does have some experience hunting multiple prey. So he is very skilled. This isn't really brought up, but it's just something that you can kind of notice. It's just on a metaphysical kind of level. Other than that, not much happens. I mean, he has this weird relationship with Brooke, and I say relationship, it's really strange. Now, I'm not going to be discussing his relationship with Brooke at all because it doesn't really happen while he's a POV, which is weird, but I'll talk about more in the character journey. But, I don't know, he's really boring in this book. Honestly, it's one of the more forgettable books of Warrior Cats. It just kind of is there. He doesn't really make a choice, ever. Aside from going back and helping, and he's kind of forced to do it because the spirits tell him to and whatnot. I know, it just kind of feels like it'd be more interesting if Feathertail was the POV, considering that she dies in this book. Speaking of which, Feathertail, in this book, dies, but not as a POV, because Feathertail has 2 chapters as a POV. That's it. 2 chapters. That's less than Flametail, another really underused POV. 2 chapters. That's it. 2. And it's just kind of why? Why so few chapters? And you know the only reason she's a POV? It's not because she's interesting or because she's written really well in this book. It's purely because Stormfur is kidnapped, essentially, and in order for the plot to still make sense, you have to have her as a POV. And then when they rescue Stormfur, he goes right back to being the POV, and then Feathertail dies. She just is murdered. She dies. It's just, that's it. And it's boring, because in your 2 chapters, you barely set up that she was going to die. At most, the only thing you set up in those chapters was her basically hearing the voices. So you at least imply that she could hear the spirits. That was all you set up for her dying. Like, she's only killed to further motivate the other characters, like her mother was, an underwritten character who was killed to just propel the plot forward. But that's just in her original appearance. Eventually, she got her own graphic novel, A Shadow River and River Clan. And guess what? It gives her a character. In this book, she is portrayed as very cynical and very kind of against her clanmates. Because, rightfully so, she doesn't think very highly of them. Because they essentially wanted her dead. Like, as a kid, she was sentenced to die. And no one stopped that. No one stopped her from dying except for the River Clan deputy, who in turn was killed. No warrior tried to save her. If anything, they wanted her dead. And she, very rightfully so, is angry about that. And thinks people are lying to her face that they respect her as a clanmate. And over the course of the journey, she becomes very, closed off. Yes, she does find friendship in Sasha, briefly, until it's revealed that Sasha's, quote-unquote, mate, Tiger Star, the father of Sasha's kids, was someone that Sasha was with, that she knew and loved and still loves, even though she knows that he did wrong. So, Feathertail kind of pushes her away and goes into isolation again. Eventually, she does start to come out of her shell and does kind of learn forgiveness. You can't see it, but I'm doing quotations here, because it is a little underbaked. It is a little underbaked because she only kind of learns to, forgive and whatnot when Leopard Star, who is rightfully almost killed, a little disappointed she wasn't, but she kind of learns to forgive, and ultimately she is given the task of being the River Clan cat to go on the journey. She has a really good character, and you really do feel for her, because she's right. Her kind of mental state is 100% agreeable and correct. And while it is underbaked, it does give this perspective that she's a lot more complex than her initial main series appearance led us to believe. And has, in fact, raised her as a sort of better protagonist than her brother. Because despite the fact he has more spoken words and more chapters to actually develop a quote-unquote character, in a smaller sense, she did more with less. But let's move on to the next part, the character journeys. These characters go on journeys. But not really. So Stormfur, in the main series, does not really go on a character journey. The only thing he really learns is to stop fighting Destiny, ? Because he was not supposed to go on the clan journey. He was not. He wasn't one of the chosen cats. The only reason he went is because he bugged his sister and wants to protect her. Because, they're siblings, and they have basically no one else. Their mother was dead, and their father is, far away. So, he wants to protect her. But he also feels a duty to the tribe, because he feels like the prophecy is speaking to him. It's the reason why he came. But ultimately, he was not the one with the prophecy, Feathertail was. Meaning that Feathertail was dragged into 2 prophecies and died in both. And if anything, the message is still clear. Even if you're not explicitly called to go on a journey, if you feel like you should, then maybe you do, because yes, he wasn't the chosen cat, but ultimately if he wasn't there, there's no way River Clan would have been able to know about what happened. So, but I don't know, they don't specifically say why he's the protagonist in this book. Aside from the fact it's like a MacGuffin, essentially. And what's weird is that he's never brought up as a protagonist again. And the only reason he's a protagonist is so that he can stay behind. So yeah, it is just a MacGuffin. It's just a plot point to, move it along, but barely. I don't know. And I'm not gonna, again, like I said earlier, I'm not gonna talk about his relationship with Brooke, because in this series, he's not really, they don't really get along. So, like, he's clearly somewhat in love with her, and she's somewhat into him, but after Stormfur gets forcefully imprisoned and forced to try to kill Sharptooth, their relationship basically stops because he thinks she lied to him, which she did, and they just never make up. So, I know up to later books, they kind of resolve this, and they have a whole relationship, they get married, they have kids, blah blah blah, but this series is only looking at their tenure as a point of view character. And unfortunately, this is all we get. We get one book where he is one of the main players, and that's it. He's never a POV again, which is weird. It doesn't make any sense. But alas, here we are. Now, Feathertail, like I said, her character journey is essentially to learn to forgive. You know, yes, people did horrible things to her, but that was in the past, and she needs to learn to forgive them. Not forget, but to forgive to some degree in order for her to somewhat be able to move on and not be trapped in this cycle of doubt, of cynicism, of hatred of people who honestly might not even consider what they did to her, or at least even consider what they did was wrong. I mean, it is kind of not as good because, like, the only character who really acknowledges the war crimes, essentially, that was committed upon her and her brother is Leopard Star. And that's only when she's, like, almost killed. It takes Leopard Star almost getting killed for her to even admit that she did wrong and apologize for what she did wrong. As far as we know, no other cat did that. So, I don't know. I still enjoy her character. I think it's a lot different from other characters we kind of get, but, you know, could be better. And then, in chronologically, her next major appearance, she dies, purely to move the plot along. Which is stupid. What does her death add? It makes Crowfeather and Stormfur sad. It makes the rest of the group sad. That's it. At least if she was the protagonist of Moonrise and she died, or if Stormfur was the one that died, it'd be nice to see that, like, you know, it was a sacrifice. And it is a sacrifice, but we barely got any time with her to really know why she sacrificed herself. Like, she says she knows what she must do, but we don't know why. We barely get even a taste. So, in Moonrise, she's really underbaked, and her character journey is just non-existence. And while Shadow and River Clan does do a lot for her character, it can only do so much to save something that fundamentally was horribly underwritten and underdeveloped. Now, granted, that does depend on whether or not this was the intention. Not the intention that they were underwritten, but the intention that Stormfur and Feathertail are their parents' children's. I mean, they're parallels to them. I mean, Stormfur much looks like his father. You know, he has the same pelt color, he has the same eye color, he has very similar personality and quirks. He falls in love with a cat outside of his clan, and ultimately does choose to leave that clan. You know, he eventually, this is a spoiler, but he does end up leaving RiverClan to live in the mountain with Brooke and have a life with her there. So in that way, he's a parallel. And then with Feathertail, she's a parallel to her mother. She's very graceful. She's very, you know, a bit snarky, a bit sassy, but she's very empathetic. You know, she likes the cat from another clan. You know, she has a forbidden relationship. But ultimately, it does end in tragedy. She does die. Although, unlike her mother, Feathertail dies via a sacrifice, which is equally heartbreaking. But much like her mother, she dies basically to move the plot along and make people sad. Which, again, it's a parallel. And if that was the intention, it's still bad, but hey, at least it's there. But, yeah, it's a little bit disappointing, to be honest. Wish Feathertail had more of a personality and had more reason to die. Like, if we got more perspective about why she was chosen. There's that. And for Stormfur, I wish we got more time with him as a POV to kind of further develop him. Make him distinct yet similar to his father. We don't get enough of distinction beyond the fact that he's just kind of Brambleclaw light, which in turn was already Firestar light. So he's like -2 Firestar, essentially. But, yeah, Stormfur and Feathertail. Characters who I think are really cool. I think conceptually they're very neat. I think in other material, like the main series, when in the first series, they're really cool, They clearly care a lot for Gray Stripe. They care a lot for their mother, even though they never met her until when they eventually did. And, but they also feel very strongly to be in RiverClan. Even despite all that's happened to themselves, they still see themselves as RiverClan cats, which is commendable. Even considering all that RiverClan did, even considering their father is part of their clan, they still feel loyal and still feel at home in the rivers. Which, despite being a cats born from a forbidden relationship, they found a home, and they're willing to do whatever they can to protect it. Even if that means either leaving it or sacrificing themselves to make sure they find salvation. And that's commendable. Feathertail sacrificing herself to make sure that RiverClan survives, the forest destruction, and Stormfur carrying out her duties to make sure that they find safety. And when that task is done, he leaves to find his own happiness. And there's a sort of melancholy, sadness, yet joy in those characters. So there you go. Feathertail and Stormfur. Tragic characters, yet nicely bittersweet. But what do y'all think? Let me know in the comments down below.